Hello, my name is Carrie Brown and I'm with the Central Mississippi Regional Library System. Today I'm going to be reading to you chapters 11, 12, and 13 of A to Z Mysteries, The Unwilling Umpire. Written by Ron Roy, illustrated by John Stephen Gurney, published by Random House, New York. Chapter 11. Just then, Officer Fallon walked out of the trailer. "Thank you," he said, handing the key back to Buddy. "I'm happy to say that you were right and I was wrong." "Can I get my stuff now?" Buddy asked. "Sure, then I'll drop you all off at Dink's house." Buddy climbed the aluminum steps and disappeared inside the trailer. "Well, what do you think?" Officer Fallon asked the kids. "I think he's telling the truth," Ruth Rose said. "Me too," Dink and Josh said at the same time. Officer Fallon raised his eyebrows. "Any particular reasons?" "Well, if I were going to steal the baseballs, I wouldn't do it with all those people watching me walk into the clubhouse," Ruth Rose said. "And if I did take the balls, I'd hide them and return to the game so I didn't draw attention to myself." "Could it have been Buddy?" Officer Fallon said, glancing at the trailer. "He could have stolen the balls and hid them till later." "No," Dink said. "If Buddy were planning to take the balls, he wouldn't have teased his brother about stealing them. He'd want to keep his plan to himself. Besides," Josh said, "if Buddy did steal the baseballs, he wouldn't let his brother take the rap and sit in jail. Buddy really loves Pete." "That's fine reasoning from all of you," Officer Fallon said, "and I'm inclined to agree with you. But then, who did take the balls? And where are they now?" "Could the thief sell the balls?" Dink asked. "Oh, easily," Officer Fallon said. "There's a huge market for baseballs signed by famous players." Just then, Buddy opened the trailer door, locked it, and walked over to the picnic table. He was carrying a lumpy backpack. "Got everything you need?" asked Officer Fallon. Buddy nodded. "Will you tell Pete where I'll be staying?" "Sure I will, Buddy," Officer Fallon said. They all climbed back into the cruiser. 5 minutes later, Officer Fallon pulled up in front of Dink's house. "Have a good pizza party," he said as the kids and Pal got out. "Why don't you come too?" Dink asked. "There'll be plenty of food." "Wish I could," Officer Fallon said, "but I need to begin talking to people who were at the game. Someone might have noticed whoever walked in the clubhouse just before Pete did." "So you believe me?" Buddy asked. Officer Fallon smiled. "I believe you," he said, then drove away. "What time should we come over for pizza?" Josh asked Dink. "How about 5 o'clock?" Dink said. "Great! I have to muck out Polly's stall anyway," Josh said. "See you later." He and Pal headed up Woody Street toward Farm Lane. "And I promised Nate I'd play with him, so I have to go too," Ruth Rose said. "See you guys later." Ruth Rose walked to her house next door. "Your friends are nice," Buddy said as he followed Dink his front steps. Dink's mother opened the door. "Hello, Buddy," she said. "Come on in." "Hello, Mrs. Buddy hesitated and looked at Dink. "I don't know your last name." "I'm Mrs. Duncan," Dink's mom said, "and I've left a plate of cookies on the table." Dink took Buddy upstairs and showed him to the guest room. "You can leave your pack here," Dink said. Buddy knelt down and looked into Loretta's cage. The guinea pig squeaked and stood on her hind legs. "I wish I could have a pet," Buddy said. "But Pete says we'll have to wait till we're not living in that tiny trailer." "Are you guys really going to Florida?" Dink asked as they walked back downstairs and into the kitchen. Buddy shrugged. "I don't know," he said. "I kind of like it here in Greenlawn." Dink poured 2 glasses of milk and handed one to Buddy. "We've got a real good high school," he said, taking a cookie. "Do they have a soccer team?" Buddy asked. "Big time," Dink said. Buddy smiled and helped himself to a cookie. Chapter 12. Josh rubbed his stomach. "I think I'm going to explode," he said. "Gee, why?" asked Ruth Rose, eyeing the 2 empty pizza boxes on Dink's picnic table. "You only ate 10 pieces." Josh fed his last crust to Pal under the table. 9 pieces, Josh said, grinning at Dink. "I wanted to save room for dessert." "There is no dessert," Dink said. "Not until we find out who took those baseballs." "I wonder if Officer Fallon had any luck," Ruth Rose said. "Maybe the crook already sold them," Josh said. "Where would he sell them?" Dink asked. "Well, if it were me, I'd use the internet," Buddy said. "The crook would reach millions of people at the same time." A lot of people shop online with UBuy, Ruth Rose said. Yeah, they sell all kinds of stuff, Dink said. Do any of you guys know how to use UBuy? I sure don't. Me neither, Josh said, but Mrs. McElroy does. The library closes at 6, Ruth Rose said. Why don't we go see her? Dink checked his watch. We've got 10 minutes. Come on. The 4 kids and Pal trotted to Main Street, then down to West Green Street. It was 1 minute to 6 when they ran up the library steps. Mrs. McElroy was still sitting at her desk when they hurried inside. Hi there. I was just getting ready to close, she said. Do you need something? The kids introduced Buddy, then quickly explained their idea. And you think the thief would try to sell the baseballs on UBuy? She asked. It would be the fastest way, wouldn't it? Buddy asked. Well, online shopping is fast, Mrs. McElroy said. Could we try? Dink asked. Sure, why not? Mrs. McElroy said. She booted up her computer, clicked on Internet, and typed in ubuy.com. A few seconds later, they were all looking at UBuy's homepage. Look, there's a place to type in what you want to buy, Josh said. Should we type in baseballs? That would give us too many choices, Mrs. McElroy said. How about we try autographed baseballs? She typed in the words. Seconds later, a window popped up telling her that there were about 50 possibilities. How do we choose? Dink asked. We need to be more specific, Mrs. McElroy said. Do you know whose signatures Mr. Pocket had? One ball was signed by Babe Ruth, Ruth Rose said. Okay, said Mrs. McElroy. She scrolled back up and typed in baseball signed by Babe Ruth. A new window popped up. It said there was one Babe Ruth ball for sale. Mrs. McElroy clicked, and there was a picture of a baseball. Babe Ruth's signature was clearly visible. Next to the picture were these words, Buy this baseball signed by the great Babe Ruth. Other autographed baseballs available. Does that look like it could be Mr. Pocket's ball? Mrs. McElroy asked. The 4 kids leaned closer to her computer screen. I don't know, Dink said. Why don't we call Mr. Pocket? Ruth Rose suggested. We should also call Officer Fallon, Dink said. He pointed to the screen. If this is the thief, Officer Fallon should be the first to know. This is exciting, Mrs. McElroy said, reaching for the telephone. A few minutes later, Officer Fallon and Mr. Pocket hurried into the library. Mr. Pocket put on his glasses and leaned close to the monitor. That's my baseball, he announced. How can you tell? Officer Fallon said, also peering at the picture. Look closely, Mr. Pocket said. Right above Babe's signature, there's a dent in the ball. That's where his bat struck. Babe Ruth signed this ball for my father personally. Everyone moved closer to the screen. I see it, Officer Fallon said. But a lot of used baseballs would have bat dents, wouldn't they? But not in the same place, Mr. Pocket insisted. If I held the ball in my hands, I'd be sure. Why don't you buy the ball? Dink suggested to Mr. Pocket. Have the thief mail it to you. Then, once you have it, Officer Fallon can arrest the guy and get your money back. It won't work, Buddy said. The guy will be suspicious if someone who lives in Greenlawn tries to buy the ball. That's where he stole it. Buddy's right, Officer Fallon said. And our thief may very well live in this town. So what do we do? I have a suggestion, Ruth Rose said. Email the guy saying you want to buy the baseball. Then ask him where you should send the check. And if he really does live around here, you can go arrest him right now, Dink said. Yeah, Josh said with a grin. The dude will probably still be sitting at his computer when you ring his doorbell. They all looked at each other. Then Officer Fallon nodded at Mrs. McElroy. She clicked a small window that said, Buy it now for $1,000. Under the window was a space to type a reply. $1,000, Josh squeaked. Okay, Mrs. McElroy, let's reel this fish in, Officer Fallon said. Mrs. McElroy typed a message that said, I wish to buy the Babe Ruth baseball. Please email me your address and I'll send $1,000 immediately. I may want to buy the other balls as well. Good job, Officer Fallon said. 7 sets of eyes stared at the computer screen. Come on, take the bait, muttered Mr. Pocket. A few seconds later, Mrs. McElroy checked her mailbox and there was a message. Send your check to Ted Gundy, 13 Boxwood Lane, Greenlawn, Connecticut, 06040. Gotcha, said Officer Fallon as he headed for the door. Chapter 13. The baseball game continued on the following Saturday. Now it was the bottom of the 9th inning. The score was men 6, women 3. The women were at bat. "Guess you're going to owe me an ice cream cone," Josh teased Ruth Rose. "I think I'll have 10 scoops." "Think again," Ruth Rose said. "The bases are loaded and Livy's up. She's their best hitter." "Yeah, but there are 2 outs," Josh said. "If Livy gets an out, the game's over and I win." "If she gets an out," Ruth Rose said. While Dink watched Livy Nugent practice her swings, he thought about the last several days. It had been an exciting time in Greenlawn. Officer Fallon had arrested the thief, Ted Gundy. The 6 stolen baseballs were found in his closet, and he went to jail. "It's neat that Pete and Buddy are staying in Greenlawn," Josh said. "Yeah, and Buddy told me that Officer Fallon had a long talk with Pete," Dink said. "He told him lying is wrong, even if it's done to protect someone else. But Pete really learned his lesson. Now Officer Fallon is trying to talk Pete into becoming a policeman." "Hush, you guys," Ruth Rose said. "We don't want to distract Livy." Pete was signaling Livy to step up to the plate. She tapped dirt out of her cleats and yanked her cap tighter. Buddy had joined the men's team, and he was pitching. His first pitch was low, but Livy swung and missed. "Strike 1," bellowed Pete. Buddy's second pitch was high. Livy tried, but missed again. "Strike 2," Pete yelled. By now, everyone in the bleachers was standing. Some were rooting for the men, but most were chanting, "Home run! Home run! Home run!" Buddy wound up for the pitch. Suddenly, everyone was quiet. The ball came right over the plate, right at Livy's knees. Crack! The hit was a line drive just inside the first base line. Livy took off for first. Mrs. McElroy left first for second. Josh's mom tore away from second toward third. Ellie shot away from third base and ran for home, where she got a huge cheer. Then Josh's mom came in, followed by Mrs. McElroy. "The game! Tie game!" Ruth Rose yelled. Dink could barely hear her. The crowd was screaming as Livy dashed for home. It was a grand slam. The game was over. The final score was women 7, men 6. Josh slumped in his seat while Ruth Rose did a little dance next to him. "Well, who's up for an ice cream cone?" Dink asked, grinning at Josh. "I am," Ruth Rose said. The end. Thank you. Goodbye.